All right, chapter 25. And Gregor and Ares are in a dungeon. Death, it took Gregor a moment to register. You mean they're going to kill us for not killing the Bane? If it is determined that is what a treason act, said Ares. And who decides that? Gregor asked, hoping it was Vicus. A tribunal of judges. The final sentence must be approved by the queen, said Ares. Well, Luxa isn't going to, he started. Then he remembered that Nerissa was queen now. No telling what she would do. Would Nerissa let them kill us? I do not know. I have not seen her since I allowed her brother to fall to his death, said Ares. I could not face her. Gregor slid down the wall and sat clumsily on the ground, overwhelmed. He had risked so much, lost so much for these people, and now they were going to kill him? I am sorry, Overlander. I should not have brought you back to Regalia. I should have foreseen this would be a possibility, said Ares. This is all my fault. It is not your fault, said Gregor. I thought there was a very good chance we would be banished, but then I could have flown you home. I am as good as banished anyway, so what matter? But treason, I did not think they would take it this far. They have never put an Overlander on trial before, and certainly not one so young. Ares began to rock back and forth. He seemed to be talking more to himself than to Gregor. I cannot let this happen. I have already lost one bond. Whatever his intentions, it does not change the fact that I let Henry die. I will not lose the Overlander. I will not let him be... Wait, I have a plan. Ares turned to Gregor, his eyes darting around as the plan took shape. I will tell them that this was all my idea, that I would not let you kill the Bane. I stole your sword. Yes, that will work because you came home without one. And then I forced you to take the Bane to Ripred because I am in league with the rats. They will believe this. I am much hated and deeply distrusted already. Gregor stared at Ares in disbelief. Did Ares actually think he would agree to that? I'm not going to let you do that. I mean, just the opposite happened. I'm the one who wouldn't kill the Bane, and I'm the one who wanted to take it to the Ripred. If anyone should be cleared, it's you. But it will not help me, Overlander. I will die no matter what. This is what they all want. We may still be able to save you. Think of your family, Ares pleaded. Gregor did. And it was awful. First Boots, now him, but he couldn't throw Ares to the lions that way. His family wouldn't want him to lie and get Ares killed for something he'd done. No, said Gregor. But you, Ares began. No, said Gregor. I am not doing it, Ares. Then we will both die, Ares said angrily. Then we will. They sat there, both of them stewing for a minute. So how do they do it? Asked Gregor. You will not like it, said Ares. Well, probably not, but I'd rather know, said Gregor. They will bind my wings and your hands and drop us off a very high cliff to the rocks below, said Ares. It was Gregor's reoccurring nightmare. For as long as he could remember, he'd had a terrible dream about it, falling through space, smashing into the ground. It was how Henry had died, and King Gorger's rats. He had heard their screams as they fell and seen their bodies bursting open on the rocks. For a moment, he was tempted to take Ares up on his offer, but he couldn't. A small hatch at the base of the dungeon door swung open, and 2 bowls of food were pushed in. The hatch slammed shut. It seemed impossible to eat at a time like this, but Gregor's stomach began to growl at the smell of food. You want to eat? He asked Ares. I suppose we should, to keep up our strength, said the bat. Some opportunity for escape may arise. The bowls contained some kind of porridge and a chunk of bread. It wasn't the most exciting meal on earth, but after days of raw fish, it tasted great. Gregor wolfed his down and felt a little better. Just because they were accused of something didn't mean they'd been found guilty. Maybe when the tribunal heard his version of what happened, they would understand. And then there was Nerissa. So no matter what the tribunal decides, Nerissa can keep us alive if she wants, asked Gregor. Yes, she can spare our lives, but Overlander, I let Henry die, said Ares. Yeah, but you know what she told me? She told me she thought it was best that he died because if he hadn't, everybody else would have died too, said Gregor. Did she? Said Ares. It must have taken many dark nights to come to that conclusion. Does she really see things, like the future? Said Gregor. Yes, she does. I have witnessed it. But she is young, and her gift is a torture to her. She sees many things that she does not understand, and many things that frighten her. At times, she doubts her own sanity, said Ares. Gregor didn't respond to that. He wasn't convinced that she was sane either. The door swung open, and the guard stepped in. It is time for your hearing, said the one in charge. His hopes for escape dimmed when they bound his hands behind his back. Ares's wings were pinned against his body with a rope. It was like they were already being prepared for the execution. All they needed was a cliff. Several guards hoisted Ares onto their shoulders and marched off briskly. Gregor followed behind as they retracted their steps up several flights from the dungeon and then veered off to another part of the palace. They entered a room that was set up for judgment. This was not the room where the Underlanders had threatened to banish Ares. It was more formal. More official, a long stone table with 3 chairs sat in front. That's for the judges, Gregor thought. Directly behind the center chair, elevated by a platform, was a throne. Off to the right, you faced the table, with a stone cube with 3 steps going up to it. It was positioned so that not only the judges, but anyone sitting in the 7 tiers of seats that rose to the high ceiling could get a good view of it. The witness stand. Every seat in the house was filled with either a bat or a human. They stared down at Gregor and Ares with undisguised hatred. But it was eerily quiet. It had almost been better when everybody was screaming and throwing stuff. Gregor was directed to an open area in front of the table. The guards set Ares down next to him. They stood staring at the empty table before them. Then there was the sound of more footsteps. Gregor turned his head and found Howard and Andromeda behind him. They were both bound and looked ragged. "What are you doing here?" Gregor exclaimed. "We too are on trial for treason," Howard said hoarsely. "For what?" said Gregor. "You never even made it to the Bane." "That is precisely the reason," said Howard. Then Gregor realized that what he meant. Howard and Andromeda were on trial because they had not finished their mission. They had returned to Regalia with Marith. "But," objected Gregor, "I made you go back." "No one made me do anything," said Howard. "I came back of my own free will." "Well, that's not what I'm going to say," said Gregor. He was suddenly overwhelmed by the way his decision had jeopardized the lives of those who fought by his side. He couldn't let this happen. A side door opened, and an old man and a decrepit white bat entered. A moment later, an elderly woman appeared with several scrolls. All 3 took seats at the table. The woman, who seemed to be the head judge, took the center seat. She glanced back at the throne and addressed a guard. "May we expect Nerissa?" she asked. "They are checking now to see if she has regained consciousness, Your Honor," said the guard. The woman nodded, but Gregor could hear people in the crowd murmuring, probably about the frailty of their new queen. One glance from the head judge and the room fell silent. Gregor had the feeling that whoever she was, his life was in her hands. For a few minutes, nothing much happened. The judges preoccupied themselves with examining the scrolls. Gregor shifted his weight slightly from side to side. The rope was really biting into his wrists. He wondered if he could ask them to cut it loose, or if they would be a major breach of court behavior. Well, it was worth a try. "Excuse me, Your Honor," he said. The judges all looked at him in surprise. "Yes, Overlander," said the woman. "Do you think you could untie us now?" "I'm losing all the feeling in my fingers," said Gregor, "and they knotted the rope right over one of my squid sucker sores. You can't see it, but Ares's whole back is covered with open wounds from the flesh-eating mites that killed Pandora, and Howard and Andromeda are pretty beat up too." Even if she said no, Gregor was still glad he'd spoken. He wanted them to know, all of these idiots packing the seats waiting for his death sentence, that he and Ares and Howard and Andromeda were the ones who had been out risking their lives. Suddenly he couldn't wait to testify. "Cut free the defenders," the head judge said, and turned back to the scroll. No one in the crowd dared object. A guard cut all their bonds. Gregor rubbed his wrists and glanced back to see that Howard was doing the same. "Did Marith make it?" he asked. Howard's tormented face broke into a brief smile. "Yes, he will mend. I can't believe you kept him alive after the serpent attack." said Gregor. He said serpent attack extra loud to make sure everyone heard, then turned back to the front before anyone could tell him to shut up. A guard hurried into the room and whispered something to the head judge. Very well, said the head judge, we will begin. She cleared her throat and read off the series of charges against the defendants. The language was pretty complicated, but it all seemed to boil down to the fact that Gregor hadn't killed the Bane and nobody else had either. The head judge finished the list of charges and looked up. We will now question those on trial. Can I go first? It burst out of Gregor before he could stop it, but suddenly he knew he had to. He could sense that Howard, Ares, and probably Andromeda were already convinced they were guilty. If they got up on the stand, they might not be able to defend themselves. He, on the other hand, was absolutely bubbling over with the injustice of the whole thing. Overlander, the head judge said firmly, it is not our custom to shout out inquiries during the trial, especially one so serious in nature. Sorry, Gregor said, but he didn't hang his head or look away. What should I do if I have a question? Raise my hand? I mean, I don't have a lawyer or anything, right? Raising your hand should be sufficient, the head judge said, ignoring the lawyer question. He thought about raising his hand and asking if he could go first, but that might seem snotty. Whether it was because he had asked or because he was already slated to do so, Gregor was called directly to the stand. He climbed the steps to the cube. It was designed so people could see any twitch, any shift in the defendant's body language. He felt very exposed. Gregor expected to be bombarded with questions like you saw on TV, but the judge merely settled back in their seats and looked at him. Tell us, then, said the head judge. Tell us about your journey. This threw him a little. Where do you want me to start? Start from the day you sailed away from Regalia, said the head judge. So he did. He told his story, and every chance he got, he made sure to emphasize the courage the others on trial had shown. When he got to the part at the tankard, he said, I made Howard leave. He didn't have any choice. I was going to fight him if he tried to come with us. I'd have fought Andromeda too. She knew that. That is why they went home. How could they risk injuring me when I still had to kill the Bane? And why did you not want them to accompany you? Said the old bat. Gregor had a moment of confusion. Because we needed to get Marith back for one thing, and I didn't want a whole bunch of people in that maze, I guess. I wanted my family to know what had happened to my sister and me if I didn't come back, and because he spun back in his mind to the cave, to the ice that had engulfed him, because the Bane was mine. A gasp rose from the crowd. What do you mean the Bane was yours? Asked the bat. It was mine to kill. That's what your prophecy says, right? I'm the guy who's supposed to kill it. And in the end, it was always my job, said Gregor. And it was my call who I wanted to take into the maze, not yours. He paused. Anyway, if you kill Howard and Andromeda because they came back, that's just murder. Nobody could have done better than they did. He looked over to where the others stood. It was hard to read Andromeda, but she did shake her wing a little. Howard's lip silently formed a couple of words. Gregor was pretty sure they were thank you. Maybe he'd made a convincing enough argument to keep them alive. Go on with your story. What happened after the company parted ways? Asked the head judge. Gregor took a deep breath. This part was going to be harder. He told about entering the labyrinth, having to leave Twitchtip behind, finding the cone, and witnessing the bloody fight between Goldshard and Snare. There was a reaction from the crowd again. Gregor suspected they were happy that Snare was dead. Just then, Nerissa appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on Vicus's arm. Her coronation gown was lopsided, and stray braids hung out of her hairdo. There was not even the suggestion of a crown, no tiara, no gold band on her head. She kept squinting as if she were in bright sunlight. It took Vicus and a pair of guards to keep her up onto the throne. She swayed slightly even when she was seated, as if at any moment she might plunge to the ground. Queen Nerissa, are you well enough to attend this trial? The head judge asked in a neutral tone. Oh, yes, said Nerissa. I've seen myself here before, although I do not know the outcome. This was the sort of stuff that made everybody think she was crazy. Maybe someone ought to tell her to keep her vision under her hat, crown, whatever. The charge is treason? Nerissa said doubtfully, and Gregor realized she had no idea what was going on. The head judge said slowly, yes, the defendants are on trial for treason. Nerissa stared at an empty spot on the wall for a moment, then shook her head. Forgive me, I have only just awoken. Do you wish us to begin the proceedings again? Asked the head judge. Oh no, please continue, said Nerissa. She knotted up her hands. Another braid sprang free from its pins and fell down the side of her face. Her whole body was shaking. The head judge looked over at Vicus, who avoided her gaze, and busied himself placing his cloak around Nerissa's shoulder. The queen gave him a smile. I wish I had some soup. Oh, geez, thought Gregor. She wasn't going to help their case any. The head judge turned to Gregor. So after the fight between the Gnawers, Goldshard, and Snare, what occurred next? Gregor tried to regain focus. So then we heard a scratching in one of the tunnels, and we knew it was the Bane, but the tunnel was small. Ares couldn't fit into it. I had to leave him in the cone. I went down the tunnel. I was ready to kill it. Then when I found the Bane, it started crying and calling out, Mama! And I mean, you told me it was like a 10-foot rat. I guess you don't know or whatever, but I wasn't expecting the Bane to be a baby. Nerissa flew to her feet. A baby? Yeah, it was a baby rat, Gregor said, surprised she was even following along. She stumbled down the steps and came reeling around the table, her skirt all twisted up in one hand while the other waved wildly. Oh, warrior, she cried frantically. As she lurched toward him, he was torn between trying to catch her and just getting out of the way. Right before she made it to the cube, he leaped off and grabbed her by the shoulders. The icy fingers of her free hand clutched the neck of his shirt. Oh, you did not kill it, did you? She said. No, Nerissa, I didn't kill it, he said, totally baffled. I couldn't. She heaved a huge shuddering sigh and sank down to the ground at his feet, laughing. Oh, she patted her knee reassuringly. Then we may still be saved.